Jod AI, which is a inclusive artificial intelligence platform that helps leaders, managers, and all around individuals give responsible and thoughtful answers to questions and everyday actions where they may need some help or support crafting an answer. Each company is building kind of their own AI models, and those are called LLMs. LLMs are large language models that take huge amounts of data and aggregate them together and think through that data with cognitive thinking like a human brain. And that's actually why AI is so powerful. Jod is a small language model called an SLM, and that is a very limited, specific set of data. And the data that we use is inclusive data that makes sure that we break down all the different areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, inclusive language, terminology that's more sensitive, empathetic, and equitable. And what we do is we plug our data on top of OpenAI, on top of Gemini, on top of other platforms, so it comes out with responses and answers that are more inclusive depending on which prompt you type into the search box. One of the challenges is when you talk about equity and when you talk about systems, it's asking yourself, who are the actual individuals working with those systems, programming those systems, and ensuring that the data is efficient, effective, and relevant, that adapts to all the larger AIs to ensure when customers use or type in information around sensitive areas that they get answers that can be used in the flow of conversation and the flow of everyday life. Not always do the larger models have such specific information in that area, and that's one of the things that Jod provides. We must be in the rooms that decisions are being made and realize that once we get in those rooms, our voice becomes a vote and we actually have input on how they're improved. We have to start now learning about new systems, learning about new technology. Now is the chance to learn a little, learn a little, learn a little. In 15 years, it'll be so far advanced that we won't even be able to recognize it. Realize it's all incremental gains that will help you improve in the future.
Good morning, First Baptist. I'm Jackie, and this is Crosstalk. We bring you FBCLG stories, news, and information centered around the cross. Join academic excellence today directly after service in the Fellowship Hall for the Richard Barber Youth Museum of Black History, Rekindling Our History. Watch as our youth bring historical figures to life through their own words and actions in this powerful celebration of Black history. Don't miss it. Join us Tuesday, February 25th at 7 p.m. Behind the Curtain, Unpacking Policy, Power, and Impact on Black Lives for a powerful discussion on how recent policies impact the Black community and what we can do about it. Experts in faith, DEI, and political science will break down the headlines and real-world impact. This event will be live-streamed on our usual platforms. We invite you to join our Survivors Sanctuary on Monday, March 3rd from 7 to 8 p.m. This peer-led support group is a sacred space for survivors of domestic abuse that meets on the first Monday of every month. This is a virtual event. For more information and to register, please visit our events page. On March 5th, join us as we kick off our church-wide fast and mark the beginning of the Lenten season. Stop by our Ash Wednesday drive-thru from 12 to 4 p.m. to receive the imposition of ashes, where our clergy will be available to serve you at your car. And then gather with us later at 7 p.m. for our Ash Wednesday service. Let's come together as a community to reflect, renew, and prepare our hearts for the season ahead. Future Moguls is back with another impactful financial literacy workshop. Join us virtually on March 11th at 7 p.m. as Bilal Little, director at the New York Stock Exchange, shares his presentation, Understanding Diversification with ETFs and Crypto. Don't miss this opportunity to gain valuable insights and expand your financial knowledge. Please register on the events page. High school students, don't miss your chance to experience the FBCLG HBCU College Tour from April 14th through the 17th. You'll visit Delaware State University, Virginia State University, Virginia Commonwealth University, Coppin State, Morgan State University, and Howard University, along with a special stop at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This is your opportunity to explore the rich legacy of historically Black colleges and universities, connect with fellow students, and create lasting memories. Seats are limited, so go to the events page today for more details and to register. Thank you for tuning into Crosstalk, and remember to check out our events page and social media to stay up to date on what's going on at FBCLG, the place to be.
Coming up next, join us as we go behind the curtain to unpack policy, power, and the impact on Black lives. Stay tuned.
Affirmative action, DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, the myth of meritocracy. So much is happening in our world, and so much is changing. Behind the curtain, unpacking policy, power, and the impact on Black lives. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for Behind the Curtain, where we will be unpacking policy, power, and the impact on Black lives. I am Minister Angela Pearson, the Minister of Faith Formation and Discipleship here at First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens, and I am so blessed to be able to have this conversation with you all. The purpose of tonight's discussion is to really focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's become a popular term, a buzzword, but so many of us don't know what it is. So tonight we're bringing in 4 Black professional experts in their fields who will be able to discuss with us the term, the phrase DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll discuss and define the term. We'll talk about the historical resistance, right? We know that this term is relatively new and maybe new to many of you watching, but the history of resistance and inclusion in our country is not something that's new to us. So we'll also talk about the history of resistance as well as civil rights in this country. We'll also talk about and hear from experts like Dr. Harris in political science, African American politics, and Black thought. So I thank you all so much for joining us for this wonderful conversation. And to give our audience some information about who we have joining us, I'll just take a few seconds to introduce you each. So today we have with us Adrienne C. Smith. Hello. Adrienne is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at a large PR firm. Adrienne is also the founder and visionary of the Can Diversity Collective, a nonprofit organization created to provide access and exposure to young adults of underrepresented communities to global thought leadership conferences on advertising, marketing, creativity, economics, innovation, and technology. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us Dr. Kelly Harris, who is the Senior Staff Director of the Center for Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Harris has over 20 years of experience in higher education as a professor and administrator. Dr. Harris has established expertise in areas including Black politics, African politics, Black political thought, African American history, and the history of social science. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have with us the DC Marshall, who is an award-winning business owner, an author, an influencer, and the CEO of Diverse and Engaged, which is an AI-powered training and workforce solutions boutique agency that helps organizations enhance leadership, boost productivity, and cultivate high-performance cultures for long-term success. And last but certainly not least, we have our own senior pastor, Pastor Quick, who is the 4th pastor of FBCLG. And not only is Pastor Quick a pastor, Pastor Quick is a lecturer, a speaker, and a scholar who has served the church and academy in several capacities, including as a graduate chaplain at Princeton University, legislative representative in Atlanta, and his PhD is in philosophical and systematic theology. And Pastor Quick has also taught in the academy constructive and systematic theology. How is everyone doing today?
Good.
Very well.
Thank you so much for joining us. We want to jump right in and get into this conversation about DEI. And the reason we're having this conversation is because we understand so many of us get our news from social media, from sound bites, from unsubstantiated sources, uncredited sources, and we really don't know what's going on. So many of us really don't know what's going on. So today we want to make it plain. We want to talk about what DEI is, where it comes from before the acronym was created, because we certainly know and understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion existed before the term or the phrase DEI. And we want to talk about where do we go from here. So we're going to start with Dee and Adrienne, and I'm going to ask just at a high level, and maybe not so much of a high level, if you can define what is DEI, how does it influence societal progress, and why is it beneficial?
Who starts? Dee or?
We can start with Dee.
Okay, so so what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? So I'll explain it in this way. Diversity is really representation. It's when you go into your workplace, is there a diverse representation of different types of people, right? When you go into your university, is there a diverse representation of different types of people? Certainly if you're not at an HBCU. Mm-hmm. When you go into your physician's office, medical office, is there options in terms of who you can see and who you can be receive treatment? Is there a diverse representation of physicians there. And so diversity is really about representation, whether it's school, whether it's at work, and then inclusion is really about when you arrive or when you are on the job or at school, is it a place that is makes you feel as if you are welcomed and not an other. So inclusion is really about, has that environment prepared for you and receives you in a way where you feel comfortable, where you feel safe, free from microaggressions, macroaggressions, right? Daily insults, is more of what happens in workplace. And then equity, not equality, but equity is, more about, do you have what you need in whatever space that you are in. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, from where I sit, I typically share from a workforce perspective. Okay. And so when I say diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really more from workforce, perhaps in academia, at a very base level. Certainly we can go beyond that, but that is the baseline of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll let Adrienne share more.
I'll really just add to that conversation, and just, if you want to talk high level, before the acronym became the popular thing to say that everybody sort of either you love it or you hate it, it's really about the human connection business. If we talk about the fuzziness of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's how are we connecting with one another? How are we providing access and opportunities for groups, underrepresented groups, being able to create a space at the table for someone who may not have had the same upbringing that you have, but definitely has the skill set, definitely has the acumen to be able to do the work. It's leveling the playing field so that everyone, if they have the chance and they have the opportunity, they can be in the game, whether they perform or not. The key is, did they have the access and did they have opportunity to do the work?
Thank you both for sharing. I guess my next question, based off of both of your answers, is why is it necessary? Why is it important? Do we live in a society that once was or still is absent or struggling with having diverse work environments, workspaces? Do we struggle with connecting people to other people? Do we struggle with offering access and equal access for various opportunities, including higher education and in the workspace as well? Why is it necessary?
Struggle off the table, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but let's take the struggle off the table. Okay. The reality is this type of work has existed for many years, as long as history has existed. If we just pull it even closer, if we start with the abolitionist movement, we go to the suffrage movement, we go to civil rights movement, we talk about the Disabilities Act, and then we talk about equal work opportunity. There's always been a time where people have been fighting to create opportunities for the least of these. So let's keep that in focus. I think right now, and when the term DEI, and I love that we are not separating it or decoupling it from diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's been popularized, and I'm from the advertising marketing field, when we started to find a framework of how we can name it in a quick second, in a quick acronym. If we think about from my industry in particular, in the late 1900s, 1999, when it really became popularized was when there was an instance at an advertising or a sales marketing company, and the sales company told one of his employees, it was a rep firm, an advertising rep firm, that when you go sell your radio station product, make sure that your buyers are targeting prospects and not suspects. Meaning don't sell to the urban radio stations, but try to position it to the general market. Well, when that got out, the cat's memo, that started a flurry called the Madison Avenue Initiative. You may have heard Reverend Sharpton really got into the movement. It set off this pace of making sure that Black and Latino and underrepresented media companies got their fair share of media buying, right? And opportunities for agencies to be started. So now the term is starting to come into place of creating this diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. Then if we fast forward to 2010, where we're talking about what is the makeup of the individual agencies and corporate firms, where we had Cyrus Myrie come in and work in conjunction with the NAACP to talk about, are people of color, do they have equal representation in leadership positions? Are we in the C-suite? And let's make sure that we have that positioning in place as it relates to the census data that we actually have. Then moving 10 years later, we see more of the accountability happening, where we have organizations that are formed to be able to create equal opportunities, and groups that are finding ways to recruit more diverse talent come into play. So there's been a long journey of this work. The buzzword or the buzz phrase of DEI is just finally getting attached to it, and we have to just make sure that we reframe and give clear definition about what this work has been doing for decades, for centuries, that has always been about creating a level playing field, providing access and opportunity to the underrepresented, which essentially everyone eventually is able to benefit from what happens.
Thank you, thank you.
And I'll add to what Adrienne shared about, it's not new, but why have we just heard in the last, let's say, 10 years? I would say that some of the triggers have been driven from the economic center of the U.S. That is business, that is commerce, that is the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000. Here's what happens. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion is movement-based. So every year I get a request from a Forbes or a Fortune about predictions and about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I said, well, you can't predict diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's movement-based. We are right now at DEI 5.0. DEI 5.0 is redefined, is DEI redefined, right? Let's roll back to DEI 4.0 is the anti-DEI movement, right? DEI 3.0 was the diversity tipping point. It was the period beginning May of 2020 when all of America, or corporate America, says Black lives, air quotes, do matter now. And it was because of protests around the globe. It was around the globe, but it was about racism in this country. That was DEI 3.0. And corporate America began prioritizing race and culture. Initially Black people, and then they became, that went on for a few months, and then some discomfort there, of course, and so they expanded it to, I already knew what was going to happen here. They expanded it to Latinx population. So DEI 3.0 became race and culture. And prior to that was what? It was DEI 2.0. 2.0 prioritized gender diversity, movement-based. What was the movement? It was #MeToo. It largely benefited white women. And so, again, to Adrienne's point, it's not new, but why is it front and center? It's because something happens, and then corporate America responds, and there's all of the energy and force from there, because that's where we work. And so that's why you've heard more. So when women, when there was issues within workplace in terms of harassment, sexual harassment and such, bullying and all of that in the workplace, that was #MeToo. Okay. And then corporate America responds, okay? And then the diversity tipping point, and we say the diversity tipping point to respect the deceased and the life lost, right? Which was George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and such. But it was the diversity tipping point, which was the perfect storm, right? We could not go anywhere, and corporate America had to watch, and they had to respond, and then they responded. And so how did they respond? They prioritized then commitments and investments to the Black community to course correct what they believed was systemic racism, right? Or what they were coming to learn what we already knew. So I say that to answer the question, why now it's been progressive because of movements. Something happens, corporate America has to respond, and then of course the government also responds, our elected officials. And so I just share that to give frame as to why people at home, the church, why are you hearing about it now? And it's beyond that. I'll pause because I know I know where we're going next in terms of historical context and from a civil rights perspective, but I would say that the anti-DEI movement that was DEI 4.0, it just, you know, I want to say it took this to a whole nother level where chief diversity officers in corporate America are no longer, you know, the sole owner of it. It became politicized, diversity, equity, and inclusion weaponized. Why? Because the opposition found the money line, right? You always have to just trace the money line. CRT had no real CRT, critical race theory, which was the initial, I would say, target for the opposition, right? And so then they found the money. They found the money exists within diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when I say they, I mean the opposition. I mean, you know, the powers that be right now in position that are trying to roll back. They found where is it that you know, has some specific teeth or some specific substance, programming initiatives and funding that, you know how where we can really address what's really happening. So I hope that gives a little bit more context as to, well, why are we talking about now? Now it's far beyond that right now. We're talking about people's safety. We're talking about psychological safety, physical safety. We're talking about rollbacks of 50 years of progress. So I'll pause there because I too want to hear what the doctors have to say, okay? So
that was so good. So DEI, not a new concept, just simply a new, more popularized term. And it's a matter of corporations really responding to these different movements that you both brought up, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. I'm interested in hearing Dr. Harris and Dr. Quick, your opinions on what it looks like for movements to be happening as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion before the popularization of this term. And I'm particularly thinking of, you know, the 50s and 60s, civil rights movements, the Voting Rights Act, and perhaps other movements that are fighting for justice as it pertains to diversity and inclusion and equity, that were not labeled as DEI, but kind of laid the groundwork for where we are today with these newer movements.
So, you know, how far back do we want to go?
However far back you want to go.
So if we go back to, let's say, if we look at Reconstruction,
Okay.
right, and we look at that as our movement, our struggle. We get the 13th Amendment, we get the 14th Amendment, which is very important, right, in terms of citizenship and due process, which is being attacked now, right, trying to take away being a citizen if you're born in this country. So we can look at that as the first thing. The next thing that we can look at is during the 19 teens, when Woodrow Wilson is president, is very instructive, because Woodrow Wilson was the one who told a group of black leaders in his office, he said, well, segregation, he said, it may be humiliating, but it really serves as a benefit to you, right? So he segregated the federal workforce. He hyper-segregated the federal workforce and pushed a lot of black people out. And black people responded by organizing. Of course, you had the NAACP at that time, but responded by organizing, responded by having marches, responded by developing other organizations that come up out of it. The Harlem Renaissance comes up out of that organizing effort during that time. One of the more earlier successful movements that we had in terms of getting policy changes was the March on Washington movement. 1941, A. Philip Randolph and his cohorts forced the hand of the president, President Roosevelt, to pass Executive Order 8802, which desegregated federal defense industries, also led to a Fair Employment Practices Commission, which is also Trump rescinded. That's one of the first things he did when he was in office now. He rescinded that. So we see that struggle we had in 41 to get that was a huge victory. He took that away. Then, of course, we get to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. Affirmative action comes in under Lyndon Baines Johnson. Nixon even has an affirmative action program called the Philadelphia Plan. He had a black man in his administration called Arthur Fletcher who pushed that Philadelphia Plan, which was said that there are certain quotas that we should have. Now, the Supreme Court would go back and say no quotas anymore, but that first came under Nixon. So there were a lot of victories that came out that people were pushing for. They were a direct response to a whole almost 100 years of struggle and activism. But this whole idea of diversity, right? I'm going to end with this and pass it to Dr. Quick, Reverend Dr. Quick. In 1987, there was an organization, a think tank called the Hudson Institute, which is a conservative think tank. It's not radical by any means. They put out a report called Workforce 2000, and they were seeing how the workforce is changing, that there would be more blacks and Latinos, a population rising, and therefore would need jobs, that the nature of labor in this country was still changing and transforming. Of course, we were going away from manufacturing industry, so what kind of work would people be doing? So they started, and in terms of women going back into the workforce at a level that had never happened in American history. Because of course, from the 1800s and the early 1900s, the role of a woman was to be home, right? For certain women, right? Certain other women didn't have that kind of option. So they were saying that in this report, you're going to have a lot of women and a lot of minorities, blacks and Latinos, who are entering the workforce in ways that they never had before. So how do we deal with that diversity in that? And so that's when we really see certain things happening under, and actually a republic, not for good, but we have to tease that out.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that we've got corporate point of view, and Dr. Harris began to introduce the sort of governmental policy point of view. I think it's important for us to recognize, from my point of view, that the problem with DEI is not the diversity or the inclusion. The problem is the equity, because equity engages power sharing, profit sharing. We've always been diverse, right? Just the very nature of enslavement was a diverse project, right? Africans weren't the first they attempted to enslave, right? So diversity has never really been the problem. We've all been able to exist in the same place, right? So white women allowed black wet nurses to feed their infants, right? We've been in master's house in particular roles, subservience, right? So inclusion, we can be in the space as long as we don't have equity, right? So that even a critique from a corporate level is they will include you, allow you to hold certain spaces. In the federal government, if you were black, you were the Secretary of HUD. They included you, right? But there was not to be equity, right? There was not to be power sharing. And so I think there has to be some teasing out of that even within minority and disadvantaged communities, there have been infighting there. So you take 1851, Sojourner Truth at the women's suffrage movement says, well, white women, I'm glad we're fighting for each other's rights, but ain't I a woman? So within this are multiple layers in which diversity is okay, as long as equity is not engaged in it, right? So I think that's an important nuance that we may want to look at there. I also think that if we look at Dr. Harris's encapsulation of history, the problem starts as early as 1865, Field Order 15, where the famous 40 acres and a mule was discussed, right? That's an attempt to say, okay, these people are now free from slavery. We've got to give them opportunity, even though they have revolutionized farming in America, right? All the crops are coming from African roots, right? So the second misnomer I think that's important is qualification. I think I heard Adrian speak about people being equally qualified. We've been practicing internally DEI from a folklore position, right? You got to work twice as hard, be twice as prepared. We were being prepared to be included and dynamic, right? And so the real nuance in this conversation is often equity. And whenever these women, right, find their way more talented, black women are the most educated group in America, right? That these counter movements, right, Reconstruction, post-Reconstructive, that when we talk about the language, we're talking about who can dominate the nomenclature, who can philosophically engage these issues and convince everyone. And what Donald Trump is a master of is manipulation of language. He's Barnum and Bailey, right? So I'm going to convince you through these magic tricks. And as I pointed out Sunday, not one law has been passed, right? And many of these executive orders have already been blocked by courts. Right. The damage is psychological. Mm-hmm. Yes. The damage is fear-based. And even when we look at corporations, as I bring mine to a close, it's really around appeasement. But I think as we get along, we're going to discover that I think there's a really 8-month to 2-year shelf life to all of this. I think there's some elections rolling around. And I think once we start seeing white women being dragged out of town hall meetings in Idaho, right? White women being dragged out of town hall meetings in Idaho, that there's a populist movement occurring right now. Because the dirty secret that's being uncovered is they have benefited from DEI and social services more than your black life. So when you start cutting social services, it's poor white folks. I feel like Farrakhan at this moment. It's poor white folks who benefited. FDR gave social services to poor Midwestern, farm subsidies. These weren't benefiting us. And so the sort of neoliberal movement that's happening right now is not damaging, it may damage Dee, but not as much as it's damaging Samantha. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we'll learn. Yeah, Karen.
Yep, Karen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. So we fast forward, we talked about historical events, but we fast forward, this is history, but just a few years ago, to 2023, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided to effectively end race-conscious admission programs at colleges and universities. And then we couple that with what we're experiencing now, right? All of these corporations, Target, Amazon, McDonald's, are rolling back their DEI initiatives. We see the comments that are sparked when the plane crashed in DC about DEI, it having something to do with DEI. We see the U.S. Office of Personnel Management calling for all federal DEI employees to be placed on leave. Funding is being cut, and educational institutions are closing or repurposing and renaming their former DEI departments. My question is, we talked about what DEI is, we talked about why it was necessary and needed, and how throughout history there has always been this fight for justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion. My question is, what's going on now? Why is this attack happening now? And why does it seem to be equating DEI to blackness? Right, Adrian, you talked about in your video how we're equating DEI to blackness when it really benefits a plethora or a myriad of peoples with different abilities, with different backgrounds, different genders, across lines. So why is this attack happening now? And I guess before we answer the question of why this attack is happening now, can you tell us a little bit more about who all is benefiting from DEI?
Well, I'll say people of color or black people, we're probably number 5 or 7 on the list, right? You start with white women, you go to veterans, then people with disabilities, and the Hispanic and Asian community, and I think we're number 7 after that. And I think to Reverend Quick's point, there's a psychological thing that's happening in the propaganda and storytelling, which I think on our side, we have to do a much better job in terms of storytelling about the benefits of what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually does and who it actually benefits. I think historically, we find the peaks and ebbs and flows of this through crisis moments, and Dee touched on that 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Those are key crisis moments that happen in the world and in America that trigger something that make people want to act in a way, either it's to the right or to the left, all in an effort, I believe, to bring it back to center. And before we get there, there's just this power struggle that, in my mind, despite the policies, laws, executive orders, it's the mindset that is being attacked, that we have to shift how people think about what the benefits are and the power struggle. I think here in the States, people are so enamored with who gets higher ranked than the other person. Does my whiteness put me in more proximity to power than a person who is darker than me? And everybody's struggling for a position of power. And I think that's what we're in right now, a struggle for power, a struggle for one who's got next, who's got best, When the reality is, if we all create the opportunity for all of us to have access to the things that will benefit us, I think it would make a better space. That may be like the idealistic piece of it, but I think right now, just the struggle that we're having as individuals for power, white people in particular, who are voting against their own interests to have positions of power. And right now, you know, the theory of, you know, I know we're in a church space, but FAFO, you know, they are finding out very quickly that you have to think about the human connection and how we all benefit from providing access and opportunities will matter, essentially.
Can I just, for some of our viewers who may not be TikTokers, the FAFO, I think we can substitute it with an MAMO, right? Mess around and find out.
Yes.
Right, and we can clean it up a little bit.
PG version. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
the PG version, so that there's a hashtag movement where now regretting Trump supporters are losing their jobs and having their social service, and the hashtag is, oh, now you messing around and finding out.
Yeah.
So I want everybody to stay on top of the nomenclature there. Yeah.
Thank you. Dee, would you like to share why you think right now in this moment in history DEI is coming under such harsh attack?
Yeah, I mean, Adrian laid it out. I would say the only thing I would add to that, and what I have heard in the last few years, is the discomfort about the progress of people who look like us. We have made great strides as people. And so in some spaces, you know, I'm in corporate space, and I'm part of an organization, or several organizations, but one in particular, and there's about 20,000 members, and 80% are, I sit on the board of directors, and 80% of the board are Fortune 500. And some of the insight from the board, of course, because I'm one of few, there's a lot happening after the diversity tipping point, right? A lot of programs, a lot of initiatives. Everything was black. And it was making them uncomfortable. And that's not the only reason. I'm just adding to right now. I'm adding to what Adrian mentioned, and it's when there is the perception of, again, another getting more than what you have, then it makes people uncomfortable. And so, you know, behind closed doors, there becomes the question of, you know, why do we have these initiatives for this group of people, for Black folks? And so I think a lot of that added to what we're seeing currently. It added in the last 5 years after the diversity tipping point, with a lot of the perceived course correction, which was not as much, right? Because it was all performative. A lot of what happened after the diversity tipping point was very surface. It was 1 year, so commitments, over $85 billion committed to historically Black institutions, but we already knew those funds were not going to be dispersed. You know, I was having this conversation earlier today about what percentage of the $85 billion, I'm sure somebody here may know, was dispersed. And what I'm referring to is after the diversity tipping point, this is for everybody at home, and after, you know, George Floyd was murdered, and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and corporate America began joining forces to say, oh, we're going to course correct systemic racism, which they really didn't. They really didn't understand. They didn't understand. In fact, a lot of what happens in corporate America that is attached to diversity, equity, and inclusion is more surface. And I know that because we do surface, but we also do systemic work, right? But their comfort level and the fragility doesn't allow them to then be in corporate, and folks who may not share, look like us or share our thoughts, surface work versus addressing systemic barriers. And so to close this up, what I'm saying is, and what I'm adding to what Adrian shared, is just a lot happened in the last 5 years. Now, granted, the movement that we're seeing right now, they've been working on this since the civil rights movement, and that's where the doctors could speak to, right? It's known that, you know, since the civil rights act, there's been a force already, or immediately after that, to say this is unacceptable, okay? And then we can even track it back to when affirmative action was overturned, and the cohort who led that initiative had tried to overturn affirmative action. I believe it was denied maybe 10 years or such. I'm not, y'all keep me honest on the date. So there had already been a movement to hold us, to oppress our people, but again, it just continued to get worse. And then I'll roll back another, 16 years when President Barack Obama was elected as the first black man in the, as commander in chief. That stirred up what was already percolating, and it made the opposition uncomfortable. And so if you just add to, again, the progress and such, then that is why we are here to today. And the last thing that I would say is, which is just really painful, there's a leader of evil, a leader that motivated and emboldened people who were not for equality, equity, diversity, and just to have a leader, the occupant of the White House, to be bold and unapologetic in evil, I can't even, because it's PG, because we're talking to the church, I'm gonna stop right here, okay? Because we're talking to the church. Now, listen, if you want to talk to me after, okay, we can have a blackety black. But because I'm still trying to get into heaven, I'm getting it, okay? I'm getting it, okay? But we'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to Dee's point, there's always been an underpinning of this rumbling of I'm losing power. And it's, in my mind, fear-based of losing control and losing power, especially when a group that has been oppressed, and many groups that have been oppressed and silenced for hundreds of years, all of a sudden now can excel beyond measure and beyond what we've seen before. That puts people on their heels of fear. When the numbers are dwindling, I don't know the exact percentage, but the number of people of color will outnumber, we go from the minority to the majority in a very, I think 20, you'll give me the numbers, you'll give me the stats. But that's a fear-based thing of, now what about me? The concern of late in the last, since George Floyd was killed and the movement of Black Lives putting up a black square, all became an issue of now what about me, when other communities started to be affected, when the Asian community, when the Asian hate crime started, when the Jewish community was struggling with what's happening in Israel and Palestine. The question everyone started to ask then was, what about me? Where's the movement that's going to support me, like the movement that surrounded the Black community during George Floyd, when that huge crisis moment happened, when everyone was in one place to watch what was being done. He was murdered in front of the entire world at one time. And I think had it not been for that singular moment, we might be in a different place than we are right now.
So I want to talk about, this is not a question that I had written down, but I do want to talk about the misconception that many people have, including the leader of our country, that DEI hires are equivalent to people who are unqualified and don't deserve to be in the position. So now we hear the language of, we want the best minds on this, we want the best minds on this, we want geniuses only smart people, we can't have incompetent people, as if to say that people of color, minorities, people who fall under DEI hires or don't fall under DEI hires but are diverse and are seeking to make workplaces inclusive do not have the same qualifications, do not have the same experience, do not have the same education as their counterparts. And I want us to just speak to that myth, that lie, if we can.
So let me start by saying, and then I saw you want to speak, but let me jump in before. There's a saying that says an organized lie is much stronger than a disorganized truth. And that is one huge organized lie, that DEI means not educated enough, not capable of doing a job. What they're pushing for is MEI, which is merit, excellence, and intelligence, when the reality is if they really believed in MEI and merit, then DEI, they would clearly understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion creates the foundation for which MEI can exist. Because when you create an environment where you can bring a diverse set of thought, diverse people coming in who can offer different perspectives in, when you create an environment where you're creating equitable opportunities for people to level up, to be able to get into the door, when you're inclusive and making sure that you're finding a way to find that talent that you have not seen, to bring them in and then give them the same opportunity and voice, because share of voice is very important, then the environment definitely for merit exists. And they don't believe in it because you can tell by the current, if we're talking about politics right now, they don't believe in merit because of the choices that are being made right now in terms of the key leader of the world as well as any of the cabinet pieces, so cabinet picks. So I think it's about how we're storytelling, and you'll hear me say storytelling a lot. We have to shift the narrative away from DEI is not valuable, or diversity, equity, and inclusion is not valuable, when in essence it is a key business driver, is why so many companies are succeeding. If you take a look at Ben & Jerry's, they're succeeding because of their ability to incorporate elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's why Costco is doubling down, 10 toes down into diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they see the benefits of creating an environment that allows people to thrive and their money to grow. I'll stop and you can go.
Yeah. So I want to amplify a couple things
Yes.
that you said and that you said. So first of all, we got to go back and see, of course, George Floyd was the flashpoint when everything changed. But it was a tipping point. It absolutely was a tipping point. But the other thing that we have to remember is this narrative that's being created. It is a narrative, and that's what Trump and his minions are good at, creating these narratives that make people believe something is true that's not. There really hasn't been any substantive DEI when we really look at it. Now, this is what I mean. If we go back to 1967 and look at the median household income for African Americans, it was about $31,000. If we look at it for white Americans during that time, it was close to $60,000. We are only now getting to that point where they were in 1967. White Americans still are well over 80,000 in terms of median household income. White men are at the highest other than Asians, men and women. So they're doing well. They're doing better than they've ever done before. But they've created this narrative that somehow DEI is taking something away from them when they've been doing good from since always, but they've been doing good this whole time. Nothing's been taken away from them. But they've created this narrative that we're doing well, and that we're a threat somehow to this country because people start talking about, after George Floyd, systemic racism, and trying to push people to deal with those issues. That's exactly what they don't want to deal with. And this whole idea really of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity and inclusion first, then equity came in, was really not to deal with systemic issues in this country. Because if we look at it now, even white men are the majority of people in executive positions in corporate America and in the federal government. They're the ones in senior level positions. Black and brown people are really at the bottom still in terms of manual labor. We're not operating in terms of the higher level positions. But people see Snoop Dogg everywhere. They see Kendrick Lamar do the Super Bowl, and they think, oh, black people are doing great. There was a
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, Snoop Dogg. There was this study years ago from the University of Georgia, and they interviewed a lot of white people and trying to figure out, well, how do they think black people were doing in society? And the answers they were getting, a lot of them thought black people were a majority of society, population. They thought black people income was excellent and wealth was excellent. And the researchers said, well, where are they getting this from? Why do they think that? And the reason they were getting it from was watching television. When they see black people in sports, in basketball and football, they see them on TV shows, or, the Cosby Show, and all these other shows. They say, oh, look at black people, because this is where they get their information from. Right. They think black people are doing fine just from those kind of things. So it's this whole Trump and them have created a narrative that makes people think people are taking their jobs when that's not happening, that people are threatening, their livelihood when that's not happening, when they've been doing very well. And my whole thing is, if you all think that because this is the whole narrative, white men think they're being oppressed now, right? They're being discriminated against. I don't know a black person that wouldn't trade our discrimination for their supposed discrimination if it's so bad.
Yeah, I think we've got to go back to a man named Lee Atwater if we're going to talk about storytelling and the Southern strategy, right? That Richard Nixon put and Ronald Reagan picked up around the welfare queen, right? Who controls the media controls the story, A, and who consumes the story can determine the destiny of their lives. And it makes me think of the Chicago Defender. And when we lost the ability to support each other through information, we became dependent upon an oppressor to give us information. We depend upon an oppressor to educate us. We depend on an oppressor to feed us. And really, there's two things for me. The sort of philosopher, theologian in me wants to kind of shift the narrative, not center it solely on power, to existence. I think what we see here is fear of inadequacy. And that's what's been created since the whole psychosexual notion of enslavement, right? The black body has always been intimidating and yet desired. And so the nasty secret in enslavement was the sort of sexual desire and lust that enslavers had for black bodies. White women had a deep lust for the black buck, right? And so the very notion of existence and the intimidation, if I sit next to Dee Marshall, this is an intimidating woman, right? She walked in the door, intimidating, right? Like mahogany, right? So that there's a sort of swag that blackness has, that's being imitated in culture. You go to South Africa, they're rapping. You sit in Nice, France, they're rapping in barbershops in Nice, France. We export existence. And so I think part of what's happening here, to sort of support what Dr. Harris has said, our existence is both desirable and threatening. And it is as old as the Bible, right? Joseph was anointed and called. His existence threatened his brothers. So that God practices DEI when God countermands the oldest brother concept. Y'all got something, and everybody wants what you got. And though George Floyd, I think, was one tipping point, I think Barack Obama became the psychological mania in America, right? And I think the tipping point in the Obama administration was the killing of the most wanted terrorist in the world. And I think the image of him strolling down that long White House hall, saying that I destroyed the man who mastered 9/11, right? That created an insecurity in the white psyche that has now resulted in a rage that created George Floyd, right? A rage that brings us all these other folks, right? This anger that how dare you create an existence that's so much bigger than me, right? And so when we look at our president today, we're looking at a very small individual, like Hitler. Hitler was a very small, psychologically insecure. That is, when you read on fascism and dictators, most dictators from a psychological profile are radically insecure and small internal human beings. They are flexing in order to find some type of existence. In philosophy, we call it ontology, right? So I think that one of the things that we are experiencing right now is we pass laws, you still thrive. We incarcerate you, you still thrive. We flood your community with drugs, you still thrive. Everything we do, we undereducate you, you still thrive.
Yep.
And so if Adrian is correct, and you got a 30-year lifespan left on majority status, it's what last thing can we throw? Because I do think this is white supremacy's Alamo, right? This is white supremacy's Alamo. What last thing can we do? And I think that desperation is what we see. That's what looks different now. There's a desperation to the white supremacy at this moment that didn't exist as overtly, I think, in other options.
So there's this level of desperation and fear on one side of the oppressors who are fearful of our excellence and our being made in the image of God. And on the other end, on our end, there's also this amount of fear because we simply don't know what's going on. We're receiving our education and our information from oppressors. And so this is why we're having this event, right? So that our community can learn about what's going on, what's been happening, what we can do to move forward from us, from Adrian, from Dr. Harris, from Dee, from Pastor Quick. And I think my next question really is, can we talk about what's going on today? Have there been any executive orders, policy shifts and changes as it pertains to especially the Black community that is impacting us, that is harming us, that we need to be aware of? Because oftentimes, again, we read our news on social media, we read headlines, and then we just become fearful. And I just want us to inform the community about the different changes and policy shifts that are happening, the ones that might happen, the ones that we think are happening and have not really made a move yet.
Well, I think the most obvious one is the attack on affirmative action in higher education, and the attack on critical race theory, what they think is happening with critical race theory, what they think is woke, what they term that is. A lot of people are losing scholarships. A lot of people are losing jobs. You know, there are Black spaces on majority campuses being shut down. You know, so immediately I think those things are of immediate concern to us in terms of policy actions. And DEI, the thing that's, and Dr. Quick had mentioned this earlier, is hitting everybody. It's hitting people that he didn't even intend to hit. So that's one thing we have to be mindful about as well. But that's hitting us as well in terms of our jobs in the federal workforce. In terms of me, we still, African American Studies programs are now trying to figure out what's going to happen. Are they going to try to get rid of Africana Studies in higher education? I know they want to, you know. So that's something for us to look to.
You know, I would add, I think the secret thing that I'm most worried about as it relates to the federal workforce is the post office. And this assault on the post office has been the last 10 years since Trump first came in. He appointed a postmaster general whose job was to downsize the post office. And just from a personal experience, we came into the middle class through certain portals, and one of those big portals were postal workers, right? I grew up in Washington, D.C., and if you were a mailman, you were able to buy your family a house, right? They were good jobs. And so there are certain spaces in the public sector that have been better for us, and that the assault's there. But I also think Dr. Harris is raising a point that I raise and amplify. When we look at the destruction of the social infrastructure in America, it's going to impact and is impacting non-Black people more than it is impacting us. For instance, the dismantling of U.S. aid. Much of the funding for U.S. aid was through the exporting of farm goods, grains, wheats. Farmers got a lot of subsidies. Well, you destroy U.S. aid, you take away the farm infrastructure. And so the Midwest is feeling that, right? And the irony of coal workers and fossil fuel industry, and that the man running the government, Elon Musk, is trying to take all that away with his electric cars. Right? They voted against their own interest. And I think not only do we have to look at how it's impacting us. But more, we have to look at how it's going to impact them, because I think we've talked about this. This whole movement is about 2 years, because white people are feeling it faster than we are, right? It's hitting them in space. We used to learn, we know how to live in being broke.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We know how to thrive. We know how to thrive when the economy goes down. Matter of fact, we throw the best parties when money is low.
Yeah.
They don't.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we come from a people. I mean, the resilience of our people is just, we're built for this, unfortunately and fortunately. We're built to survive. So to Dr. Quick's point, you know, I just returned from a trip to from the continent, and one of the things that I learned this trip that I did not know before was how long was the journey from West Africa to the US when our people were enslaved. Okay? You know how long? For everybody watching at home, in the chat, how long? So how long from the moment our ancestors came to the door of no return and they were forced to get on the ship, and some of them, you know, for the women and the girls, if Adrian and I would have been chained together with, I think, a 25-pound weight, and I already knew I can't get on this ship, I'm gonna jump. I've committed suicide and taken my sister with me because we were chained together. But the moment, and then if we didn't do that and we got on the ship, you know how long? It was 12 months. So you mean to tell, and this makes me emotional, that our ancestors had to walk through the door of no return and get on a ship, 12 months. And I don't want to go down the dark hole, but I use that, and it was very helpful for this moment because it just reminded us of what we are made of, the resilience. I mean, the tenacity. There's just so much that is baked in our DNA, and every bit of evidence that says that we will survive, not only from the strength of our ancestors, but as people of God. So 12 months on a ship. And so I share that because, to Dr. Quick's point, we know how to survive. They don't. But you asked the question about the impact. And I'm somewhere between, you know, and I share this with my mom and her senior friends. Don't watch the news. Like, look, you don't need to pre-worry. When something happens, we'll let you know. But because you asked the question, and Dr. Quick mentioned it in terms of how we could be impacted, I went to just reference the executive order, which again is not law, not yet. And most of them, again, are just, it's part of their strategy to get into the minds of the people and to put out a welcome mat. So for the opposition, the colonizers, to go ahead and do what y'all gonna do, okay? But here's what would be at risk in terms of aid. And this is where the white folks are not ready, right? And it's school lunches, child care, right? Daycare, school lunches, Medicaid, all of the federal aid is on the table right now. And where the opposite, or let's just say where the other folks are MA, FO, where they're about to find out. I saw an interview with a woman who was a teacher. And the interviewer said, well, you voted, right? You voted, because my response right now is, you know, I mean, did you vote? Okay, well, who'd you vote for? Okay, well, you know, this is what you voted for. And the interviewer said, did you vote for Trump? And she said, yeah. But you didn't vote for the school, you know, kids to not have lunch. And she said, no, I didn't sign up for this. So she is distraught about little Jimmy, Becky, Susie, and Khalid. She's upset because now her heart, she has a heart, she's a teacher. Right. and educators, her heart for the kids who are not going to have meals. But you voted. Yeah, but I voted for him, but I didn't vote for this. Okay, you mess around, you're about to find out, okay? Because guess what? We're going to sleep at night. I'm sorry to say, baby, I'm not losing sleep. You know why? Because God is still in control, and we did our part, okay? So I can sleep well. In fact, I'm not going to say that because we're going to keep it clean. But my point is, I wanted to answer the question about, what's at risk, and, like I said, I'm on both sides of, I don't want people at home and for people to be overly concerned, because for some of us, we don't need any trips to the ER, okay? For heart palpitations and overly worried about things that you can't immediately or directly control or impact right now. But this is the piece that broke me a minute. When I think about kids and I think about seniors, I think about my grandmother and I think about kids at school. Those are the two things, because beyond that, we gonna be all right. But our cousins and them not gonna be all right, okay? We're gonna be all right, because we are the most educated. We are I wanna say the smartest. We are privileged people in some ways, in a lot of ways. So there's that. But when I think about kids, I think about kids who go to school. Of which I don't have children. I don't have biological children. When I think about kids that go to school so they can eat, okay? When I think about seniors that are in nursing homes, I can't fully process what exactly is going to happen to these people in these rooms. Because I can get my grandmother and her roommate, Miss Betty, okay? But I can't take everybody here. And what could happen to these people, seniors? And so there's that.
Thank you so much for that. I want to continue this conversation. I just want to pause briefly to say we are on the last leg of this presentation. We will, in a few minutes, invite you all to hop online and just type your questions in the chat, and we will field a few questions to our guests so that they can answer any outstanding questions that you might have. But just continuing on this path, I want to transition to a conversation about the Black church, right? We've discussed school lunches are on the table, so children might go hungry. We've discussed books and education, and departments and higher learning institutions are on the table. Healthcare is on the table. What is the role, and I want to start with Pastor Quick, what is the role of the Black church, right? Where do we go from here? How do we support the very real economic needs of the people in this season?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I appreciated my dear sister Dee's response and all the responses. And I think this is where I've said over the last couple of months, there's great opportunity, right? There's great opportunity for us to now wrap our arms around ourselves and to create care. When I think about the Black Panthers, we have models. When I think about Chicago and feeding programs and LA and Watts, where kids didn't go to school hungry because we fed ourselves. And I think historically the church, and when I think about seniors, if you come here on a Thursday, a van pulls up out front and hundreds of meals are going across to seniors in that public housing center. When we take the offering on Sunday, we're figuring out how do we make sure that this community gets taken care of. So one, I think there are multiple levels of resistance. There's the collective economic resistance through our ministries that we have a history of, right? That when we took a missions trip to Alabama to deliver water, they were getting diseases that had been eradicated 50 years ago. I passed water to a woman who was in her 70s. It's 90 degrees outside. And she got out to her car and hugged me and said, "Baby, I'm so glad you're here," right? Churches all over this country, and not just the big churches, but smaller churches, are engaged in deep and abiding work. And I think one of the misconceptions of black religion is that we're all pimps and, you know, imposters. When I defy somebody, do you know how much rent black churches pay? How many electric bills we pay? I won't belabor it, but I think there's another level of resistance that we offer. The other level of resistance, and I noted this myself on Sunday, it really every week, the power of watching. I said this on my Facebook page. I've buried so many black boys. When I was in Vallejo was Ferguson before Ferguson was Ferguson. I pastored in a city where officers had bent badges with Klansman signals on their badges. I've had to bury boys over my career, and I've watched mamas cry over their sons and daughters. Sunday, we had an act of resistance because we saw 4 young boys say, I want to get baptized. I want to give my life to Christ. That's an act of resistance. It was the first time I'd really noticed black mamas crying over the bodies of their boys, not because they were being buried, but because they had affirmed their existence. And I think over the next several years, we have to keep creating possibilities. A 70s party where we just laughed, right? Black joy is an act of resistance. Mental health at this church, whether it's bereavement or dealing with families with mental illness or helping women come out of abusive relationships, those are acts of resistance. So I think the church has an amazing possibility to stand up, not just economically, but intellectually, emotionally. And the last thing I'm going to say is with you, Angela, and this group. The one thing I realized, Dr. Soares and I talked about that when I got here, the greatest asset that First Baptist has is right here. We have a think tank in our community, right? You just got back from Tanzania, I believe? Senegal, Gambia. Adrian is taking young people all around the world. You're doing leadership conferences on the continent. He's leading a branch of learning at an Ivy League institution. You have a Princeton education that better come back into your community. This is a fraction of the people that come in this door every Sunday. If we can galvanize that intellectual and emotional power and business acumen, that's what America's afraid of. And my commitment is, as an institution, not only will we galvanize it, but it'll explode all over the place. So that when Pharaoh puts his foot on the people, the Bible says, they just kept multiplying. They just kept growing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to jump over to allowing our online audience to engage with us. And we have Miss Keish one, I hope I'm getting that correctly, who's saying, I hear many opinions in regards to segregation and how it hurt Black people post-Reconstruction. Should we go back to Black folks segregating ourselves? And I'll start with Dr. Harris on that.
No.
Okay.
So people say that a lot. I think I even said that a few times in my life. So I understand. So the things, when people think about segregation, they're thinking about us having our own businesses and supporting our own businesses. We should still do that, and we need to do that. They think about our education in terms of we're being teaching ourselves our history and making sure we have that. We needed to do that then, we should still do that now. So those things. Du Bois got into problems with the NAACP because the NAACP was fighting for integration through legal means, and Du Bois was still talking about our needs to have Black-owned Black colleges and universities. And the NAACP was like, wait a minute, you can't keep pushing that while we're pushing this. Du Bois' thing is we need both. We should fight for what's ours because we pay taxes, right? See, when people talk about, well, we should go back to, is segregation a good thing? We got to remember, we pay taxes. And we paid in not only in money, but in blood in terms of this country and in building this country. So this is our country, just as much as anybody else. So we deserve the benefits from it just like anybody else. So we definitely always need to have our own, but we also should be continuing to demand that to be breaking doors down and breaking barriers down.
Anyone else want to share their thoughts? Should we go back to segregating segregating ourselves?
I might say that we've never left. Yeah. In many ways, we still live in our own neighborhoods. It's just that our neighborhoods are substandard. We still go to schools that are majority black. New Jersey is the most educationally segregated state in the union right now, right? We're under a federal mandate. Federal judges are trying to desegregate now New Jersey schools. And so I'm not sure if it's a segregation integration question. I think it may be, as Dr. Harris has alluded to, a engagement of structures and systems that are controlled for our advancement. In other words, I have been critical recently of the fact that we live in not just food deserts, but healthy food deserts, right? So when we're calling for boycotts, the question becomes, do I have the privilege to boycott Walmart because I have transportation modes to get to other places? I can afford other food chains. But if I am a household of 4 with a $30,000 a year income, I need mass pricing, right? It's Whole Foods ain't in my budget, right? So we've got to start asking ourselves strategically, what does it mean to boycott? Is boycotting a privilege? Rosa Parks had a car. She was stationed on that bus. She had a car. And so we've got to ask ourselves, were we ever really integrated? We're in a church that's always been black. Sunday is still the most integrated, most segregated day of the week. When was the last time, and I've asked people this when I've done workshops, when was the last time you've had lunch with somebody who wasn't your race? How many people that are not your race come to your house? So I think it's almost a false question. We have always still been segregated. We've had access to integrated jobs, right? But that's where the equity part comes in. So that if a corporation is going to hire D. Marshall and the only vice president she's available for is the DEI, not the CFO, not the chief marketing officer, then we're still there, but are we there?
Right.
Right. So I'm not sure that it's a real option. I think the problem we had is really psychological enslavement. Because I can go into Macy's, should I leave my local tailor? And because I can go into a white funeral home, do I leave my cousin's funeral home? And I think that's really the interest. Is dislike of ourselves allowing us to take our dollar elsewhere and not recirculate it in our community? Because if I go 5 minutes down the street to New Brunswick, there's a little Spanish-speaking community where I guarantee you every dollar that's coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, is circulating down that street in a 3-block area 25 times before it leaves. And as I've told President Holloway and the board of the CEO of Robert Wood Johnson, there's a street, it's almost like an invisible marker. It's their community till you get to that street. And then they don't cross that street. There you're now on Rutgers campus, they don't cross it, but their dollar don't cross it either, right? And I think that is our problem. Our dollars do not support our institutions, and therefore we don't own inequality, right? And what do we own? We started BET. We don't own BET anymore. So we don't even own major news outlets, and I think the only one now is TV One, right? So we've got to start thinking about what do we own and supporting what we own.
So along that line of thinking, another question that we have is, what does it mean to boycott? And I'm thinking specifically, well, this was a question that someone else had, but I'm also feeding off of what you just said with the luxury that some of us have to shop elsewhere, the luxury some of us don't have to travel to other places that we are not boycotting. What does it look like to boycott, especially when we look at the blueprint our ancestors left us for gathering together and maybe carpooling to work instead of taking the bus, or saying, you know what, we're struggling and we're walking, but we're walking together. So the question on the floor is, what does it mean to boycott? What does it look like to boycott?
I can say, I think it depends. You know, there's an overarching, you know, idea of the boycott, but we have to understand there's a universal meaning, but you also have to localize the effort, right? And my boycott in my neighborhood may be the need may be very different from the boycott in your neighborhood. So we have to be very strategic about our call to action in our collective community of what our main decision is. But whatever that decision is, we have to make sure that we're committed to it and it is effective in terms of what we are trying to do. If there's a local business in our neighborhood, make sure all the money goes into that neighborhood to strengthen it. If somewhere else you know that transportation is the main mode of, you know, for someone to be, the bus system is the main mode of transportation, and you know that is the source of income for your area, then you know that is your strategy. We're gonna all boycott, you know, the transportation system. If for D. Marshall, it's like the Fashion Institute of some place, you know that's where you're gonna hit. You're gonna shop with your local tailor. If it's something different for the Reverend, be very strategic in terms of what your impact can be. That way we're not all stressed and stretched and frustrated to say our mass movement is not working, when in actuality we just have to localize the effort so that it has an impact in our particular area, so it strikes a chord where we are, and then that community tightens up, your community tightens up, and then the word sort of disseminates itself, the information gets spread, and they know that some system or some change is actually happening.
So good, thank you. Dee, you talked earlier about DEI 4.0, 3.0, am I getting that right? A question we have on the floor is, what would you say 1.0 was?
I mean, I think it was the inception of, let's say, the EEOC, when the EEOC was established, Equal Opportunity Office, I believe. You know, I always start at 2.0 because where did the movement come in and the trigger? But prior to that, I would say it was the affirmative action that exists and the offices that were set up to manage discrimination in the workplace. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question we have is, so Alan Daniel says, we have to continue to tap all of the organizations, especially the D9, to create opportunities to serve. How will the Black churches use this energy? Or how should the Black churches use this energy of our various organizations?
Well, I think we see that happening here, right? Our D9, we're about to take buses of students on college tours where they're going to pay a fraction of the cost. First Baptist gave $119,000 in scholarships last year. And you know, I can't imagine, you know, well, I can't imagine because I'm paying for a child to go through college now, right? That's a tremendous, and not just a $10,000 scholarship, but a book award for $3,000 to $4,000.
Remarkable.
So I think if I could just respond to one thing here about our Divine Nine, we've got to be careful about European thought trying to cripple Black institutions, especially European theology, that comes sometimes in blackface, right? So that a year ago there was this big, everybody deny your pledge because these organizations are demonic and serving false gods. And part of that, you know, we don't have time to chronicle this right now, but we got to go back to places like Liberty University. White supremacy has been embedded in European theological thought, which has been institutionalized, right? In Southern Baptist conventions where women and anything that's not a white male is marginalized. And so the movement to come after D9 organizations and to say you have to deny your Greek organization because it's against Christ was just one way in which black institutions were being attempted to be delegitimized. And we've got to be careful as guardians, why Dr. Harris is so important in academic institutions. Knowledge is critical. And we have to fight against, and I tell people, at the White House party the other day, they held up a picture of a black preacher.
Sure did.
Because the black church is the biggest and has always. There is no democratic America to the extent that America is democratic without the black church. None. We have been the guardians of democracy since hush harbors. And the greatest freedom fighters have done it in the name of their God. Even Malcolm in the name of Allah, right? And so I think we have to always and first protect, whether it's our historic D9 institutions, our Masonic institutions, our black churches, our links, all those things that have brought together black people to say, we're going to educate our children or do social services, have value, and we need to work together. So I think it's important that we support those.
Can I add another?
Yes, of course.
So like even here in New Jersey, there's a People's Organization for Progress who've been around for about 40 something years. And they meet every week and they protest. They've been fighting for social justice. Those kind of organizations, who they're one of the most consistent social justice organizations we have in this country, right? Those kind of organizations, and they've worked with the churches, need to continue to be amplified by the church and work with the church because it's very important. And the money, giving the money to the students, that's even bigger now. That's even more important in this moment that we're in. So people have to really give the black church its due in terms of what the black church has been able to do since its inception. It's been extremely important for us. Yeah.
Can I just say about the money? One example is our D9 came together to raise money for the college tour. We looked, and the average college tour for a black student was $1,500 to $1,600. We are probably going to get it to $500 or less. That's the power of collective economics to expose our children to something powerful.
Well, this has been excellent. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you all for joining us online. I know that there are plenty of other questions. I apologize that we're not able to get to all of them, but hopefully this will not be the last behind the curtain. Yes.
Is there going to be a call to action?
No, and there is going to be a call to action. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. There's going to be a call to action that we will get to after all of you have just some final remarks. We've unpacked policy, we've unpacked power, and we're unpacking the impact that it will have on Black lives, and of course, where we can go moving forward. But I want to invite each of you, starting with Adrian, to just share some last remarks, anything outstanding that you feel is important for our people to know.
I think I have so many things. I'll try to whittle them down.
Okay.
But one of the last things, we talked about the boycott. I want to just remind people, the boycott is important. Make it, we have a globally consistent message, but make it locally relevant.
Yes.
I think that is key. The other thing is have hope, right? Let's add some hope to this. Yeah. And I think this argument about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really a red herring right now, especially when you put a black face at the helm of it. Do your research and think about what else is happening, and don't get so mired in the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion and what it's doing, especially when we know we're not the beneficiaries from the work. And I always say, don't believe the hype. DEI will never die. This work will continue because the work is good. And no matter if you try to change the name, the acronym, or whatever, the work is still important. Do you remember Toby? Right? No, you don't. Maybe you don't know who Toby is. I see you nodding your head. But Toby was the rebrand of Kunta Kinte, right? Okay, they beat him until he said his name is Toby. But the reality is, in his heart, he knew he was Kunta Kinte. And I say that fight, it might be extreme in the way it sounds, but the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, creating opportunities for our people, will continue. So we cannot give up that hope. We have to continue to do the good work in creating access and opportunities for the least of these, because we know essentially we all will benefit from it.
Absolutely. Dr. Harris?
Well, since we're in Black History Month,
Yes.
I want to amplify Carter G. Woodson and just remind people that when he started Black History Month as Negro History Week, he didn't ask anybody for permission. So when people are worried about what the government doing, what they're taking away, we don't need permission to do what we need to do.
Andy?
And you know what, I'll add to that. I had 3 things in terms of a call to action, but what, to Dr. Harris's point in terms of not needing permission, thing number 1 is all of us are empowered to do something, to just pick something at this point that we feel, you know, passionate about, or where we see there is an injustice, to pick something and to advocate for that. So last year, I raised a flag here in the state of New Jersey and began working with our late Congressman Donald Payne Jr., who has since passed away, and now Senator Angela McKnight. But it was to raise the flag on the state of DEI emergency and how we needed to move from a defense to offense. But that is me as a constituent, right? Everybody here pays taxes, everybody in the state, everybody watching, and have the ability to raise a flag, to share insight, to make an observation about what's happening in our communities or how our communities are being impacted, and then to go to their elected officials. And so the thing number 1 is, you know, go to your elected officials. You can call, you can write a letter. But based on even this conversation here, what are you seeing? What's your experience? How are your people, our people, being impacted? You call and get a meeting. Right. So that's number 1. And then I think number 2, in terms of a call to action, I'm inviting everybody here, if you're not a member of a legacy organization or social justice or civil rights organization, I think everybody, this is the time to lean in, because that's where you can, these are trusted institutions. I mean, Dr. Harris mentioned one, Dr. Quick mentioned Divine Nine, but I want people to feel included. And so there are legacy organizations like the National or NAACP, a National Urban League. There is, in the state of New Jersey, NCNW, National Council of Negro Women. There is the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. So I think number 2 is for everybody here watching, get connected to a local organization that is either civil rights and or social justice, advocating for the rights of people who look like us, because that'll be a trusted resource in addition to the church. And so that is the second. And then the third, Adrian really, I think, teased this out. Join and participate in a boycott, a fast, in terms of owning your power with your buying power. So I would just say that that's the third, and I just wanted to share using your voice, advocating, knowing that, you know, we all have a responsibility to advocate for our own, and then making sure that we're connected so we can stay the course, and then, like I said, just knowing that, you know, our buying power is how we can speak. So that's my share.
Pastor Flick?
Well, I think Sister T just encapsulated it.
Yes.
We're going to put up a flyer about our recommended boycott schedules. I think we're also meeting about, you know, if boycotts are to be effective and transportation is an issue, how we might even be able to use our church transportation to get people to stores we want to support. But I think my end point is really going to be about the individual. Broken people can't move together because our brokenness will keep us apart. I think our number one act of resistance is to find spaces of safety, both emotionally, psychologically, to connect yourself with good people who will pray with you and encourage you, to seek self-care around these issues. The Klan was not out to kill every black person. They were out to terrorize, to keep you in line. This deportation issue is not out to deport every Latino, it's to keep them in line. These executive orders are not about legitimately breaking down all of government, it's to scare you. And so I think the number one act of resistance is to stay grounded in your personhood, in your humanity. Do not become bitter. Find self-care and joy. And then watch God do what God is going to do. I am actually optimistic. I think this is the last gasp of white supremacy. And I think after it's all over, America will have very few options but to turn once again to its darker brothers and sisters and say, save us, as we did in World War II, as we did in World War I, as we always do economically. So I would say, live in who you are and watch God do the rest.
Thank you all so much. And if I had to leave you with a call to action, I would say just continue to educate yourselves, right? Education is a form of liberation. We can't combat or counter what we do not know, right? And that's why we're having this event tonight, to find out what's really going on in our country, to understand these new terms that are not new concepts, and to figure out what we can do moving forward. And in that vein, before we close, we do want to, as a church, invite you, our family members, our community members, our congregants to participate in the economic blackout on Friday, February 28th. And the blackout has 3 components, right? We want everyone to boycott major corporations. So refrain from making any purchases, whether it be online or in store, from companies like Amazon, Walmart, Target, McDonald's, so on and so forth. Even avoid filling up your gas tank, right? We want you to support local businesses. If you must buy essentials or emergency supplies, please choose small, local, Black-owned businesses that you can support. And we want you to help spread the word. Don't be the only person to participate in the economic blackout. Tell a friend, text a friend, post it on social media so that we all can galvanize and support this effort. And this isn't just about spending less, right? It's about sending a clear message that we demand accountability and ethical business practices. Let's stand together and protect our economy and our future.
Angela,
Yes.
can I say one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't want to speak for everybody, but I want to say that you are the generation after us. The fact that you are here and you are leading this for us is already a sign that hope and God is creating a future for us. So I just want to celebrate you for what you've done, for what you're doing in Freedom School, and to say that if there's no future, that's a lie, because the future's sitting in front of us. So congratulations.
I appreciate that
appreciate
deeply. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We're not the same generation.
Well, I'm wearing Uggs, so I know I'm not, right?
Well, thank you so much. I really do deeply appreciate the opportunity and the privilege, and I do count it as a privilege to be able to do this type of work. So thank you all for this opportunity and for joining us. And we pray that you all have a wonderful and blessed night. God bless you.
Affirmative action, DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. The myth of meritocracy. So much is happening in our world and so much is changing. Behind the curtain, unpacking policy, power, and the impact on Black lives. Thank you for joining us.